What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Timeless Steel. I'm Jimmy, and this is episode 6 of the 2J series. It's time to put that girl into that girl, and hopefully she slides in like butter. So stay with me. I got a few things to do before we get to that point. Be right back. Well, we were cruising along and we ran into some problems, but let me show you what we got done first. So went ahead and got the new dampener put on, brand new crank bolt. And I know you guys are like, oh, why didn't you put an ATI dampener on there? Well, guess what? I'm not building a race car. This thing isn't going to rev to 9,000, and I'm not trying to run it for 1,000 horsepower. So for my horsepower goals, that new stonk dampener will be fine. Plus that was 50 bucks, and super dampener is like 400, and this is a budget build. So got that done. Transmission, took the torque converter out and polished the shaft on the backside of the converter and replaced the input shaft seal, which was original and it's probably been leaking for quite some time. And I can't show you the shaft because I don't want to take the torque converter back off, but what I can do is show you the old one. So here's the old one, and there's really no way to get these out without destroying them, but it definitely needed to be replaced. And it's an original one because the Toyota ones were bare metal on the outside. I don't know if there's a manufacturer I can read on it, but anyhow, part number for the automatic input seal, also known as a converter seal, 223830, and that's if you're using the Supra Aristo twin turbo A3040LE with the J3 stamp on the transmission. So that's in, but here's where we ran into problems. So I ordered, you can't get new flex plates from, I think Toyota does still sell them, but like getting them from parts stores and stuff, you really can't get them, or you have to upgrade to a like $400 racing flex plate, which I didn't want to do. So I got to use low mileage flex plate, which you got to be careful with used flex plates because the ring gears get worn out on them. So you can have issues with starter engagement. But I bought a low mileage one that was advertised as 19,000 miles. But then when I got it, and Dennis and I got this bolted up to the engine, we even went so far as bolting up the transmission to the engine, and I went to put the first converter bolt in, which you see this white dot here. You line that white dot up with the white paint on the converter, and then they're balanced together in theory. But this was obviously used, so it's not going to match this converter. Anyhow, we couldn't spin the converter by hand with the transmission bolted up, which is usually an indicator of a problem because you should be able to turn the converter without it bolted up. So then we took the transmission back apart and discovered that the spacing on the bolt holes is about 9 inches on this flex plate, and the spacing on the bolt holes on this, which I have these bolts in, but it's about 9 1/4, 9.3, 9.4. So we discovered that that flex plate is an NA flex plate and was meant for a non-turbo motor. The other problem with it is the ring gear sticks out past the block a little bit too far for that torque converter. So I had a IS300 flex plate laying here from when I bought the engine, measured it up, and sure enough it is the exact same flex plate that I got sent. So I reached out to them, no big deal. They've already sent it in the mail as we speak within like an hour of reporting the problem. So I should have a used 19,000 mile twin turbo flex plate in the mail in the next few days, and then join you guys from there. Now, some other things that I've done since the last video, I've got these motor mounts on here. These are made by a guy in Taiwan. You can get them on eBay specifically for 124 Mercedes conversion. I'm not going to dog the guy too bad because it saved me a lot of time, but the welds are obviously stick welds. They don't look all that great. The paint's terrible, comes right off. I don't care. I got all new hardware. save me hours of fabrication, so they'll do. Got the double checked the timing. The motor's making compression noises and feels really strong, so fingers crossed I built it correctly and it's not going to destroy itself. Got new hardware for the motor mounts, and I replaced these motor mounts less than a year ago, so they're still plenty fine. Pressure washed the car, got all the grease and gook out of here, and I pressure washed that transmission. And so now you can actually read the identiplate on the side. A30-40LE, or commonly referred to in the car community as a A340E. E for electronic, and I believe the L is to make it turbo, the turbo nomenclature, just to identify as a turbo transmission. I'm sure there's some experts out there that can correct me if I'm wrong, but the J3 stamp is how you really know that it was the higher horsepower Supra Aristo trans, and it's a hydraulic electric solenoid transmission, so you can see the indentations for the solenoids here. It uses a solenoid connector here that goes directly to the ECU, and then it's got a Toyota shift indicator plug that goes to the ECU. So it makes it kind of complicated to use in a standalone situation. You really don't have any control over the manually shifting in these unless you buy a controller and manually wire in a new controller and a shifter to basically tell the ECU what gear you're in. But if you run it in drive, it'll function as a normal transmission. The off-road community has made these really sweet manual shifters that you can wire in to trick this into thinking it's in a Supra, and that's the route I'm going to go. So I'll basically drive it normally in drive, and then I'm going to wire in a separate shifter that lets me shift gears. And I'm also going to do a shift kit for this, drop the pan, and that'll change the pressures in the transmission, make it shift firmer. And I also discovered, used parts, you find problems. This pan, this dipstick has been severely twisted, so I'll have to replace the pan on this, but you get what you pay for. I picked this transmission up for only 250 bucks, and it's worth more than that, so I still got a good deal. Hopefully my solenoids work. It was advertised as a 39,000 mile trans. I call bull on that. It's probably more like 139 based off the stuff that came out of the torque converter. But anyway, we're making progress. So these things happen when you're building cars, and we'll get that new flex plate here in a couple of days, and Dennis and I will have this thing in the car. And I mean, it honestly took us 10 minutes to bolt that transmission up, and it'll take the two of us probably 15 minutes to actually put it in the car. Here's the other thing I want to show you guys. If you're a 124 owner out there and you're trying to buy these mounts from that dude on eBay, a couple of things I don't like. He sends these shims to put under the mounts if your oil pan hits. I think that's just a cookie, just circus clown way of doing it, so I'll probably modify that. And then your transmission mount that he sends is not drilled. It needs 4 holes drilled for the actual transmission mount. So I don't know if he does this because there's variances in cars or what, but it's lazy, and now I got to drill 4 holes in a 1/4 inch plate, so I'm annoyed by that. And those mounts use the Mercedes motor mounts in the car, but they use the Toyota A340 transmission mount. You can see those 4 studs are what's got to be drilled into that conversion plate. So that's all she wrote for today. We'll see you next time when we have the right flex plate in, okay? What's up? I'm back. I just couldn't help myself. Even though I don't have the flex plate, I had to see, man, my hair is just looking phenomenal. I had to see how this motor was going to look in the car. So, boom. She looks awesome. And the good news is, this intake's going to clear no problem. No problem whatsoever. So I'm going to be able to run that factory Aristo Supra style intake. I even threw the exhaust manifold in here. It's going to clear no problem. These swap mounts that you can get off eBay for these 124s actually work pretty good. I am going to have to notch the... if you notice, the Mercedes has a little lock tab. The isolator mount has a little lock tab in it, and that allows you to tighten the bolt on the bottom without the motor mount spinning. And on the other side, it doesn't quite clear this notch isn't long enough, so I'll have to notch the other side a little bit. These mounts come with shims to make sure that you will clear the pan on the cross member. This 124 style doesn't even come close, so you don't need those shims. And it's like it was supposed to come in here, room for days. So I will probably end up running an Aristo style radiator and electric fans only, no clutch fan. I've got a little fan computer in here that was already working great before, and this stock Mercedes fan I don't think it's going to flow enough air, plus it's vibrating, grinding, making a lot of bad noises. So I'll definitely have to do some radiator and fan circuit modifications, but the fuel system on this car is almost perfectly set up for this. It's return style. It's got a return and a pressure right here, so I can just mount a regulator right off the side of the intake or mount it here. This has already got some studs exposed from something else. Good place for a fuel regulator. I'm not putting AC condenser or anything back in there. The tricky part is oil cooler for the engine and where I'm going to put the intercooler. Intercooler packaging is going to be hard. Typically you could hide behind the bumper. There is no room behind the bumper. I have seen some people with these lower the intercooler under the car in the front, and that's just asking for it. So I'm going to have to get creative with the intercooler, and I'm probably going to mount a sideways oil cooler like I did in DeLorean on the frame rail over there. But other than that, pretty straightforward, pretty easy swap, honestly. And I figured while I had this in the car and I'm waiting on parts, I can start working on the wiring. Now I went ahead and picked up a 95 to 2000 Aristo ECU, and it's a 2JZ GTE VVTi ECU, and I didn't have the plugs that went in it on the front here, so I reached out to Wiring Specialties. It was like 50 bucks, picked up brand new plugs, and I'm gonna make my own harness. Now there's a lot of benefits to making your own harness. One, I don't need 90% of the crap that's in this harness. So I'm going to disassemble it and get every single wire separate from this giant octopus, and have basically every sensor free hanging with the wires that are associated with it. Probably use a old clothesline and some you know, clothespins that you dry clothes with. Just hang each wire that I need on there. That's the number one reason, save money, right? Number two reason is it allows you to become intimately familiar with all the sensors on your engine and where they go. So for troubleshooting and understanding how the EFI works, fixing it later, you learn all the hard stuff now while you're building it. And then the third reason is it allows you to take a voltmeter and check every single pin, check continuity on each wire for each sensor, and you can figure out what sensors are broke, what plugs are broke, what plugs are missing. You know, these, especially these 2J swaps, or really any junkyard engine that you get, they are not gently pulled out of those cars. So most harnesses are damaged to some degree. And then all the wiring that I'm not going to use from this becomes extra wire, spare wire for me to wire in new sensors and stuff. Now, there are some problems with this harness that I'm going to have to address. Number one being that this was an automatic engine. However, a lot of the automatic plugs are missing or are the wrong plugs. So I'll have to get some automatic plugs for that A340. The other thing is the two main differences between a naturally aspirated Toyota harness for these motors and a turbo harness. They do all use the same igniter if you're going to run the factory ECU and plugs. Luckily this has an igniter, but the turbo harness uses a Toyota MAF sensor and a MAP sensor, so it can monitor the air coming into the turbo and also monitor the pressure at the intake manifold. So this harness doesn't have provisions for that, so I know I'm going to have to get those sensors and the plugs associated with them. No big deal. I'm going to write a list of the plugs I need. Once I figure out which plugs are damaged or missing, like I already know for a fact one of these knock sensor plugs was pulled right out and destroyed. I'm just going to call Wiring Specialties up and be like, hey, I need these empty plugs with connectors, and they'll send them out to me. So right now is kind of a no-brainer, easy part. I'm just going to start using a razor blade and individually separating every single circuit in this giant octopus. All right, check it out. That's an hour and a half or so, or just disassembling all the protective garbage off the harness. Got the main ground cable. It's a nice beefy ground cable from the factory, so I can reuse that. And now I've got this whole harness to the point where it's just literally straight wire. So it's a high quality wire. It's individually labeled and colored, and now you can just grab whatever sensor you need and pull it out of this loom. And once all these little sensors are separated, it'll be really easy to make your own harness. Cut it to length however you want it. And the reality is, even if you buy a pre-made harness, like this is, I'm not gonna lie, this is hours of work making your own harness. But even if you buy one of those really awesome standalone swap ready harnesses, they're pre-made because to fit the most amount of cars. So they make them the same length, and they're predetermining where you're going to put your ECU. So like if you want to do something unique, like what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my whole harness is going to travel straight back of the motor, come through here, and then go through the firewall, kind of like my buddy Griff did when he converted this to Mega Squirt. And the ECU is going to reside in the glove box, right in there. So even if I bought a fancy harness, nobody's making a harness that long that's going to go all the way in there. They're assuming that you're going to mount the ECU relatively close to the engine. So there is a lot of benefit in taking the time to make your own harness. And honestly, like, this is really good wire, and it's an IS300 harness. So I mean, most of the Supra stuff, I think what was the last Mark IV Supra and Aristos were made in 98. I think the Aristo was made up to 2000, so this is a little bit newer. But if you were to buy all this wire here to make this yourself, I mean, that's pretty expensive. And the fact that you don't need to use most of this, there's plenty of extra wire. So if you're willing to put the time in, you can end up making a pretty cool harness. Welcome back. Here we are. Hours and hours and hours later, I have cut this harness down, and I have isolated it to all individual sensor plugs. And what I've ended up with is most of my sensors laid out that I know I need, and a bunch that I don't need or haven't figured out yet, and a bunch of ground wires. Now, here's what's awesome. It doesn't take any brain cells to really do this. It really is just work. And I know that because I did it. So most manufacturers, if it's an EFI engine, I mean, this engine's 20 years old, but if it's an EFI engine, most of the plugs will only go to one thing. You can't really screw it up. So process of elimination, if you don't know what they go to, grab all the sensors and plugs and things that you know that you need to make your engine run, and start playing Legos and making things click, Tetris, whatever you want to call it. But it's pretty simple. So this here is an automatic speed sensor from an IS300's Auto Trans. I don't think I need that. Toyota, for whatever reason, does 3 fuel injectors in brown and 3 in gray. The igniter that drives the coils, each individual coil, your cam sensor, your crank sensor, starter 12-volt ignition lead, alternator 3-wire, coolant temperature sensor. These are pretty obvious oxygen sensors that were cut, and it looks like there was 2 of them. I'm guessing pre and post catalytic converter. I'm only going to need 1, and I'm going to wire all the sensors for the oxygen sensors into 1. And I'm also going to make it a wideband oxygen sensor so that I can run a gauge in the car. And then I'm left with a bunch of these, which I don't know, but there are a few that are obviously, you know, one of these is a low-level oil sensor that I didn't use. A few of these are body plugs to the car, to the IS300. I have no idea what this thing is. And then I ended up with a bunch of individual ground wires and a heavy-duty grounding cable, which is great because I can repurpose those on the car and not have to make them. And then over here on the car, we end up with a knock sensor with a black lead and a knock sensor with a white lead. Now, benefits of making your own harness, like I said before, you can find out where you have damaged plugs and where you have damaged wires. Well, I very quickly realized that my rear knock sensor wire was loose and pulled out extremely easily, so that would have caused a lot of problems. And then also, like, not having to buy your own wire. These are shielded wires. It's already got the shield on it. The VVTi sensor solenoid wire. It's just a lot of little plugs that add up in money if you have to buy them. And what I'm going to end up with is a harness that I know because I built. It's going to be custom tailored to the car, and it was essentially free because it came with a junkyard engine, which most of these junkyard engines do come with a harness. And I also figured out I don't need to run a map sensor, so I really only need the map sensor, and I need a new knock sensor plug because that's damaged. I'll see if I find any more damage as I'm wiring this up. And then what's awesome is if you Google Wilbo 666, which there's a million videos on YouTube and about this, but if you Google Wilbo 666, he's got all the factory wiring diagrams published. And then there's a guy called Taysic on YouTube, T-E-Y S-I-K, I think. I'll put a link in the description to his videos. But he's already done a swap like this, and he did it in a BMW E36, I think those things are called. It's a white E36 with purple valve covers on his 2J. But he was nice enough to show his wiring and then publish the pins that he used, and then he also learned a few mistakes later on that he shared. So I'll click a link in the description because it's a great video. He's got some good content. But here I've mapped it all out to what I have to do, and it's pretty simple. And those Wilbo 666 drawings, they even tell you like what size fuses and the kind of amps the wiring is going to be pulling, which ones need to be 12-volt ignition, which need constant power. So while we were waiting on parts, I got a significant amount of wiring figured out, and now once the engine's bolted in, I can just start running circuits. So that's actually a lot of progress, even though it doesn't look like much. I also discovered that this used transmission I bought is leaking fluid all over my floor, so that needs a new oil pan. I'll get one of those. And so really, other than the MAF sensor, I do need to figure out some wiring on the trans. Now there's a bunch of plugs for speed and everything else that I don't really need, but I definitely need this 8-pin solenoid plug, and I need this shifter plug. And that's because I plan on wiring a manual shifter to actually be able to manually shift this when I want to. I will be doing a shift kit and valve body upgrade on that after it's in the car. So, but here's what we've been waiting on. 2JZ GTE flex plate, and I don't have the other one with me to show you right now, but basically where the flex plate bolts up to the to the torque converter, these recesses are a little bit more shallow, and the holes are further out towards the ring gear. So even though if you put this next to the IS300 one, it looks really similar to the naked eye, but it's just off enough that it doesn't work. So this one is shallower to the block, and it has wider mounting holes. The IS300 one sticks out a little bit further, and it has narrow mounting holes. So that's that. So on to the exciting part. We're gonna pull that back out, modify the engine mounts a little bit, bolt this correct flex plate up, bolt the transmission up, and then get this in the car for good. Stay with me.
Yeah, baby.
you look at that. That is pretty cool. It's like it was meant to be. I mean, look at that thing. Look at the oil pan. It's got like the same angle as the cross member. It looks like the sway bar was bent to fit. Plenty of room to put the turbo in. Plenty of clearance on the starter. Plenty of clearance on the Supra intake with that Rad Industries conversion spacer, whatever you want to call it. The adapter thingamajigger. Anyhow, I mean, that it even looks better than it did when we mocked it up, because now it's got weight on the motor mounts. It's sitting down in there. It actually has a little bit more firewall clearance. Dude, I mean, tell me that doesn't look like it came in this car. I mean, it looks better than the Mercedes engine did. So, man, pretty exciting. Right now the transmission mount is loosely bolted in. I've got to replace the rubber transmission mount and drill some holes. But it's essentially there. It's just a little bit cocked because I don't have the transmission mount bolted in, but yeah. So we've made quite a bit of progress already. We've got a rebuilt engine. It's bolted in the car, and we've got we're 50% of the way there on electrical. I mean, I've already got a plan. I've already got everything laid out. So we're cooking with bacon grease now. Let's see, hard parts left to buy. I need a fuel rail, fuel pressure regulator. I need an intercooler. I need an oil cooler. I need a radiator. I need an oil adapter sandwich block for oil pressure feed. I gotta build an exhaust, build all the piping. But man, we're not far. This is moving quickly. It's moving real quick. So there you go, episode 6. I know this is a long series, but I want to take somebody from the very beginning all the way till the end on a swap, and that's the whole point of it. And man, this one's gonna turn out cool. I really love this car. I think I might like this car more than my own DeLorean, honestly. I can't wait to just leave it looking as crappy as it does on the outside. And I mean, I think it looks pretty sick. It's got just enough patina that it's not crappy. Crappy is a harsh word, but I love this car. I am super stoked at how well this is coming together. And honestly, super stoked that this intake clears. But anyway, if you like this content, hit like, leave comments below. I want to hear from you guys. Comment, you know, what do you think? What don't you like? What do you like? Talk to me, Goose. Subscribe, share the channel, tell your friends, and we'll see you next time here in Timeless Steel Garage.